It was the winter of 1888, and the wind howled through the plains like a pack of starved coyotes. Folks in the town of Bell's Hollow had seen their fair share of snow, but this storm, it weren't like any other. It came fast, thick, and without mercy. The kind of cold that didn't just nip at your bones. It climbed inside him, settled deep, and whispered old prayers you hoped you'd long forgot. Pastor Whitmore had only one daughter, young Miss Lydia, a sweet thing with a voice like morning birdsong and a heart too kind for this hard land. Folks said she could charm a wild Mustang into stillness with nothing but her smile. That day, she'd gone out to fetch supplies from the general store. The storm weren't supposed to hit till sundown, but nature don't hold to no schedule man understands. By the time the snow started piling knee-deep and visibility dropped to a whisper, she hadn't come back. Pastor Whitmore waited by the church door till dark, his lantern swinging in the wind, his eyes searching the white for the shape of her. When the sheriff arrived and said the trail had gone cold, the pastor dropped to his knees in the snow, mumbling things even God might have strained to hear. Come morning, they found her horse, spooked and breathless, wandering along the ridgeline. Saddle empty. No sign of Lydia. Just a lone glove tangled in the reins. 3 days passed. The town held a vigil. Mrs. Crenshaw made stew. Old Sam Harper offered his snowshoes. But hope don't survive long in a blizzard. By the 5th day, even the pastor stopped listening for the sound of her voice through the wind. That's when he came, silent, like a ghost out of the timberline. A rider wrapped in a thick buffalo coat, snow crusted on his hat, horse steaming like a furnace. He didn't speak at first, just dismounted, handed the pastor a kerchief, Lydia's. Folded careful, edges singed like it had seen fire. She's alive, he finally said, his voice low, like he didn't trust it to carry. No one knew the man. He didn't give his name, didn't ask for food or drink, just sat quiet by the fire in the saloon that night, eyes fixed on the flames, like he was watching memories trying to burn themselves out. He said she weren't alone when the storm came, that she'd been taken, not by snow, but by hands meaner than frost, and that he had tracked those hands for 2 days, through white so thick you couldn't see your own sins. Where is she now? The pastor asked, voice shaken, like a leaf in the wind. The rider didn't answer, just looked up, those eyes colder than the storm outside. I'll take you, he said, but you best bring a weapon, and your faith. The morning they rode out, the sky hung heavy with the promise of more snow. Pastor Whitmore strapped his father's old rifle to his back and kissed the frostbit cross that hung from his neck. The rider, still silent as sunrise, led the way, his horse moving through the drifts like it knew the devil was just a step behind. They didn't speak much. The wind had a way of stealing words before they could form, and truth be told, the pastor weren't sure he wanted to know what the man would say if he did talk. There was something in the way he rode, straight-backed and slow-eyed, that spoke of war and blood and the kind of vengeance men don't come back from. By nightfall, they made camp in a hollow near the old mining road. The pastor built a fire, while the rider unsaddled the horses. Still not a word. After supper, jerky and half-frozen beans, the pastor finally broke the silence. You see her? With your own eyes. The rider stared into the flames. They got her in a cabin. North Ridge. Old trapping shack. She's alive. For now. The words chilled the pastor more than the wind. Who are they? Ex-soldiers, he said. Scars where their uniforms used to be. Call themselves the Red Jackals. Men who ain't got no country left, so they make their own. The pastor's hand trembled near his rifle. Why her? The rider looked at him then, and for a moment the fire danced in his eyes like he'd seen the truth, and wished he hadn't. Because she's light, he said, and light don't belong in their world. Next morning, they followed a narrow ridge, wind-whipped and treacherous, where the snow came at them sideways like arrows. The rider stopped at a broken tree. A spruce bent low like it had bowed to something terrible. Trail splits here, he muttered. One leads to the shack, other leads to death. The pastor swallowed hard. How do you know which is which? The rider gave the faintest of grins, the kind that don't touch the eyes. I've been down both. They took the left fork, where the snow lay untouched. The only sounds were the creak of saddle leather and the crunch of hooves on ice. Then, just before dusk, they saw it. A thin plume of smoke curling through the trees. "Get down," the rider hissed. They tied the horses and crept forward on foot. The shack sat low in a clearing, half swallowed by snow, with a narrow trail of boot prints leading into the door. Through the frosted window, the pastor saw her. Lydia, wrapped in furs, her face pale but whole, eyes wide and tired, and beside her 2 men. One was counting something on the table, coins maybe. The other sharpened a knife, with the kind of patience that comes before bad things. The rider leaned close. 2 I see. One more likely asleep. Maybe more. The pastor's hands gripped the rifle. "We wait for night." The rider's eyes narrowed. "We wait for the right kind of dark." And with that, he pulled a bundle from his saddlebag, cloth, oil matches, the old tools of ghost work. That night, death came quiet. The dark came fast in those woods, the kind that swallowed whole even the thought of light. The rider, still nameless, still silent when it counted, moved like he was born in it. The pastor followed, boots sinking into drifts that reached near his knees, breath hitching from both cold and fear. They waited till the moon was no more than a smear behind the clouds. Then the rider handed the pastor a flask. "Oil," he said, "for the door hinges. You'll go round back. Quiet. When you hear the whistle, kick it in." The pastor's mouth was dry. What if they heard her when we come in? The rider's eyes flashed, and the voice that came was hard steel wrapped in snow. "They won't get the chance." With that, he vanished into the tree line, his figure swallowed up like smoke in a gale. Pastor Whitmore moved slow, crouched low, oiling the old hinges of that frozen back door. He could hear voices inside now, men Logan. One of them mentioned Lydia by name, in a tone that curdled his blood. He clenched the rifle tighter, jaw set. Then it came, a high, clear whistle. Not loud, just sharp enough to slice the quiet. The pastor didn't think, just drove his shoulder into the door, and it gave way with a muted crack. Chaos followed. The front window exploded inward, glass and flame spilling through like angry stars. Smoke and ash filled the cabin. One of the men inside rose screaming, clothes alight, and before he could make it to the door, the rider was there, like a shadow in a storm. A gun barked once, then twice. By the time the pastor got inside, it was already over. 2 men lay crumpled, one slumped near the stove, the other sprawled across the table where the coins had scattered like spilled teeth. A third one was still breathing, barely, trying to drag himself across the floor. The rider stepped forward, calm as ever, and planted a boot firm on the man's wrist. "Why her?" he asked again. The man coughed, blood froth in on his lip. "Preacher's girl worth something." "Ransom, who told you she'd be alone?" The man laughed once, wet and hollow, and then the rider's pistol spoke a final time. Lydia was huddled in the corner, arms wrapped tight around her knees. When she looked up and saw her pa, her face crumpled, and she ran to him, sobbing against his coat. The pastor held her tight, murmuring her name, tears freezing on his cheeks. She was alive, cold, scared, but whole. They rode back through the white the next day, Lydia bundled between them, her head leaning against her father's chest. The rider led the way, never looking back, never slowing down. When Bell's Hollow came into view, the townsfolk gathered on the road like ghosts. The pastor helped Lydia down and turned to thank the man, but he was gone. Not a word, not a trace. Just hoof prints that vanished in the snow like he'd never been there at all. But in Lydia's satchel, folded tight between her mittens, was a note written in a clean, steady hand. "Some debts ain't owed in gold. J." The blizzard passed, but the chill lingered in Bell's Hollow. Lydia was safe under her father's roof, tended by the town midwife, and watched over like a lamb fresh returned from the wolves. But something had changed in her eyes, like the storm hadn't just taken warmth from her skin, but something deeper too. She didn't speak of what happened in the cabin. Not at first. The townsfolk had questions, of course. The red jackals were known in whispers, but hadn't been seen this far east. Some said they were just campfire tales. Others remembered the scars they'd left on old mining towns out near the territories. Either way, they'd found Bell's Hollow, and they'd come for her. Pastor Whitmore couldn't sleep. He'd sit by Lydia's bedside, one hand gripping his worn Bible, the other resting on his rifle. "You believe he was an angel?" Old Mrs. Crenshaw asked him one morning, fixing stew in her tiny kitchen. The pastor shook his head. "No angel rides like that. He was a man." "But how'd he find her?" she whispered. He didn't answer. Truth was, he didn't know. A week later, a rider arrived. Not the silent one. This was a lawman. Deputy from Dalton, down the ridge. "You Pastor Whitmore?" he asked, boots leaving muddy imprints on the chapel steps. "I am." "Your girl was kidnapped." "She was." The lawman scratched his chin. "Name we picked up off a dead man near Boars. Tooth matched a known jackal. Another was found burned. Third one shot through the eye. Neat as a coin toss. Locals say a stranger passed through. Quiet. Fast." The pastor said nothing. The deputy's eyes narrowed. "Some think he was working with the jackals. Took him out after a deal went bad." "That man saved my daughter," the pastor said, voice flat. "Maybe," said the lawman, swinging into his saddle. "But that kind of man don't ride without reason, and reasons have a way of circling back." He tipped his hat and rode out, leaving more chill in the air than the wind itself. That night, Lydia finally spoke. "I heard them talking before he came. One of them said, we weren't supposed to keep her this long." She looked at her father, eyes wide and trembling. "They weren't planning to ransom me, Pa. They were holding me." "Holding you for what?" She shook her head. "They said someone was coming. Someone paying real good." The pastor felt the world tilt beneath his boots. "Who?" She only whispered. They never said. 2 days later, fire lit up the northern ridge. An old trapper's cabin, used by the jackals, was found burned to its bones. Inside were blackened remains, but also something else, a silver locket, untouched by flame, with a tiny photo inside. Lydia. Someone had taken it, then left it to be found. The message was clear: this ain't over. 3 weeks passed, and peace tried to settle in Bell's Hollow like dust on an old shelf. But peace don't stick long when vengeance is in the wind. Lydia had returned to her chores, but her hands trembled when she fetched water from the well. The townsfolk still whispered, and her father still kept his rifle close at hand. Then one cold morning, a package arrived, wrapped in oiled canvas, tied with twine, and left on the chapel steps. No footprints in the snow. No rider on the road. Inside, a blood-stained ledger bound in cracked leather. No note. No name. Just a title burned into the front in neat, careful script. Debtors. Pastor Whitmore opened it slow. Inside were names. Dozens. Maybe hundreds. Each written in the same precise hand. Some had marks beside M, crosses, skulls, question marks. Most had dates. Some were scrawled over in red ink. But one name stopped his heart cold. Lydia Whitmore held. January 14th, 1888. Value unpaid. Next to it, in smaller script, final claimant pending. He slammed the book shut, breath itching. Someone had bought the girl's life, or tried to, but someone else got to her first. The pastor rode to Sheriff Mallory's ranch by dusk, clutching the ledger like it was poison. Mallory was a retired man, half blind and stubborn, but once he'd been the law in 3 counties. He listened, then thumbed through the book with a scowl. "This ain't no outlaw's journal," he said. "This is a bounty book." "Bounties?" the pastor asked. "Not for criminals. For people. Targets. Folks with enemies and value. Kidnapping. Debt collections. Retaliation. Old world mercenary work. Who'd keep a book like that?" Mallory stared into the fire, jaw tight. Someone with a long memory and longer reach. That night, the pastor couldn't sleep. He sat by Lydia's bed, book on his lap, rifle beside his chair. His hands shook with rage. Whoever wrote this had put a price on his daughter's head. Then he remembered the initials in the note Lydia found. J. He turned to the back of the book. Tucked into the spine was a folded paper, like it had been slid in after the rest had been written. 4 words, ink still fresh. He's still watching her. The pastor rode out at dawn with that cursed ledger tucked in his saddlebag. Left Lydia under the care of Widow Marnie, who kept a scattergun by the door and nerves steady as a poker hand. His course was set for Dalton Ridge, a mining town turned graveyard after the silver veins dried up. The place was known now for two things: whiskey that could blind a man, and silence that could bury him. It was there, Mallory said, the Red Jackals first splintered off from a regiment gone bad, deserted during the war, formed their own code, started selling their skills to the highest bidder. The pastor's horse slogged through sleet and mud, hooves striking old stone buried in slush. By the time he reached Dalton's edge, the town looked less like a place and more like a wound, shutters hanging loose. Snow drifted up to the saloon's porch, and not a soul in sight. He tied off his horse and stepped into the saloon. It smelled of old tobacco, spilt liquor, and regret. Only one man sat at the bar, a gaunt figure in a union coat turned inside out, bandaged hand cradline, a chipped glass. The barkeep gave a nod. "You're looking for stories or trouble, preacher?" "Neither," the pastor said. "I'm looking for names." He pulled the ledger from his coat and laid it on the bar. The man in the union coat stiffened, his fingers going, white around the glass. "Where'd you get that?" he rasped. "Off a man who ain't breathing no more." The saloon fell still. The fire crackled, but no one moved. Then the man at the bar leaned forward, breath hitching. This was the devil's roll call. We called him Judge, but that weren't his real name. Judge, he ran the list. Found the buyers. Picked the targets. Had riders all through the territories. Why, Lydia? The man swallowed hard. Sometimes they'd take folks for profit. Sometimes for spite. You step on the wrong boots, cross the wrong river, they mark your kin. Past ain't gotta make sense to leave a scar. The pastor's voice dropped to a whisper. "Where is he now?" The man's eyes flicked to the window. "He don't stay one place long. But last I heard, he was holed up at an old chapel up north. Hollow Rock. Fitting place for a man who plays God." The pastor stood. "One more thing. The man who saved her, the rider. He ever worked for the judge?" The man at the bar let out a long breath. "Once. But he broke the rules. Killed a client instead of protecting him. That's why he rides alone now. That's why the judge wants him dead." Outside, the wind picked up again, and somewhere beyond the trees, a shadow moved, silent as a prayer that ain't meant to be heard. 3 days' ride from Dalton Ridge, across wind-scoured flats and through canyons that howled like the dead, the pastor came upon Hollow Rock. A crumbling chapel stood crooked against the winter sky, half swallowed by bramble and ice. Its steeple leaned west, its door hung askew, and the cross above the altar had fallen long ago. Whatever God once watched over this place had turned away, or been run out by something meaner. The pastor tethered his horse and stepped into the broken nave. The wind blew in behind him, stirring ash and paper on the floor. Inside, a fire crackled in the hearth, low but steady. And there, in the front pew, sat a man in a black duster, long legs stretched out, hat tilted low. He didn't move, didn't turn. "You come all this way, preacher," he drawled. "Must be truth or blood you're after." "I'm looking for the man they call Judge." The figure chuckled, a sound like gravel in a tin cup. "You found him." The pastor's grip tightened on the rifle. "Why my daughter?" Judge finally looked up, and there was no madness in those eyes. Just calculation. Cold, exact, without mercy. "You ever owe a debt, pastor? Not the kind you confess in a sermon, but one written in blood? You preach forgiveness, but some men like you, forget the things they did before the collar." The word struck like a hammer to the chest. "I don't know what you're talking about." "No." Judge stood, slow and deliberate. "I got your name from a man dying in a trench near Vicksburg. Said Whitmore abandoned the line. Left his unit for dead. That same man hired me, paid me to mark you and yours." "I was a boy," the pastor whispered. "Barely 17. I was scared." Judge shrugged. "So was he. Died with his jaw shot off. You ran. He paid. And now here we are." The wind slammed the chapel doors open, and snow swirled and like ghosts called to witness. Judge drew first, but a shot cracked the air before he cleared leather. Judge staggered back, blood bloom on his chest. From the shadows behind the altar stepped the rider, still silent, still nameless. His pistol smoked like it had just spoken gospel. "I figured you'd come," Judge gasped. "I always do," the rider said. The pastor stared between the two men, heart thundering. "How long you been following?" The rider holstered his gun. "Since she was taken. I broke the rules once for a little girl outside Abilene. Figured I'd do it again for yours." Judge coughed, sank to his knees. "You'll never be free." The rider stepped closer. "Ain't trying to be. Just settling the balance." With a final breath, Judge went still. The chapel went quiet again. Only the fire and the wind remained. The pastor looked at the rider. "What now?" The man turned toward the open doors. "You ride home. Hold your girl close. Me, I've got more names to cross off." The wind howled behind them as the pastor and the rider made their way down from Hollow Rock. Lydia was waiting in Bell's Hollow, but the preacher's heart weren't at ease. Vengeance don't lift its boots so easy. They camped that night under the broken spine of Dead Man's Pass, where the trees bent like old men in prayer. The fire crackled, throwing long shadows across the rock. The rider sat hunched, polishing his colt with the care of a man cleaning old sins. The pastor finally spoke. "That ledger, how many more?" The rider didn't look up. "Enough. Why keep following it?" He leaned back slow, eyes on the stars. "Because I wrote the first names in it." The pastor's breath caught. "You." "I was the judge's hand. Long time ago. Before I learned what mercy felt like." Silence fell hard between them. "I hurt folk," the rider said. "To pay for it. Told myself it was justice, that folks got what they deserved. But then I met a girl in a firelit town. Her name was Mercy. She smiled at me, gave me coffee and questions I couldn't answer." "What happened to her?" "They came for her. Because of me." His voice cracked like the frozen wood behind them. "I buried her myself. That was the day I turned." The preacher stared into the flames. "You ever wonder if you're making up for what can't be fixed?" "Every damn day," the rider whispered. The next morning, they rode separate ways. The pastor west, back to his daughter. The rider east, toward the next name. He passed through dry gulches and rail towns, following whispers of survivors, folks left with scars and names carved into their memories. One name came up more than once, Calloway. Not Judge. Worse, a rich man's son turned butcher, ran with the jackals, betrayed even them. Now he had his own crew. No laws. No code. Just blood. They said he was building something in the desert, a compound, a fortress, guarded by hired guns and ghosts from the war. And he had his own copy of the ledger. The rider tracked Calloway's men to a saloon in Dust Haven. Didn't announce himself. Just stepped through the swinging doors, quiet as snowfall. 5 men at a table. One wore Lydia's glove on his belt like a trophy. The rider drew. When the dust settled, only he stood. The glove he took back. The ledger page he burned. And then he rode. Toward the desert. Toward Calloway. Toward the reckoning. They called it Ash Hollow. But it was no hollow. It was a scar in the desert. A jagged canyon, ringed by cliffs and watched day and night by rifles on high. Edgar Calloway had built it like a kingdom. Walls of timber and stone. Centuries paid in blood and whiskey. No women, no law. Just his men and his rules. He sat atop it all in a 2-story house of painted cedar, with glass windows stolen from a preacher's parlor and a library full of books he couldn't read. He liked the look of them. Made him feel important. Below, they branded cattle and burned names into ledger paper. Every man who entered owed him. Every man who left had a hole in his past. But Calloway wasn't interested in cattle anymore. He was after legacy. In the lowest cellar, deep beneath Ash Hollow, he kept a red ledger, the master book. Every deal the judge ever made. Every bounty. Every secret transaction signed with blood or coin. And he kept it under lock and key, guarded by 2 men who'd slit a throat for water. It was there the rider came. Not loud. Not blazing guns. He came in the storm. A dust storm had rolled in from the west, thick, mean, with teeth, and under its howl, the rider slipped through the canyon edge, dropped down from the bluff where no sane man tread. He moved through shadows and slaughtered silence, striking like lightning and vanishing before the thunder. By dawn, 2 of Calloway's scouts were gone. By dusk, 3 more failed to report. Calloway paced in the house above the cliff, drink in hand, pistol on his hip. He knew who it was. Should have finished him years ago, he muttered. His right hand, a scarred brute named Vic, spit tobacco into the fire. Too many ghosts in that one. We left him breathing. He started hunting. Ain't stopped since. We'll stop him now. But the rider wasn't stopping. He moved closer each night, leaving bodies and burned pages behind. Each corpse had a piece of the red ledger pinned to its chest. On the 4th night, he left a name. Calloway. No note, just the name. Burned into rawhide, hung from a post by the gate. The men didn't sleep after that. They posted double guards, but the desert don't care for numbers. When morning came, they found the locks to the cellar smashed, the guards tied with their own belts, and the red ledger gone. Calloway roared like a wounded bear. He took it. Years of power gone. Vic said nothing. The rider didn't just want vengeance. He wanted erasure. The desert was still that morning, too still. Even the wind held its breath. Calloway stood atop the bluff, pistol in hand, face drawn tight, like leather left too long in the sun. Below, the gates of Ash Hollow hung open, creaking in the breeze. His men were gone. Scattered. Dead. Or riding fast in the opposite direction. Vic had fallen 2 nights back, found with a knife in his heart and a Bible verse carved into his chest. The wages of sin is death. Now only Calloway remained. The rider came up the pass slow, coat flapping like wings behind him. He didn't draw, didn't speak, just stared. Calloway spat. You think this makes you right? No, the rider said, voice low. Just done running from wrong. He tossed the red ledger onto the dirt between them. The wind caught the pages, scattering names like leaves. You wanted a legacy, the rider said. There it is. Ashes. Calloway raised his gun, but the rider was faster. The shot echoed through the canyon, sharp and final. Calloway fell, clutching his chest, eyes wide with disbelief. His last breath rattled in the dust. The rider holstered his weapon, turned to the rising sun, and rode out without another word. He left no name, no trail. But a week later, a letter arrived in Bell's Hollow. Folded careful, sealed with wax. Lydia opened it with trembling fingers. Inside was a single line. No more debts. He won't come for you again. And a small wooden cross, weathered, carved by hand. Pastor Whitmore placed it above the chapel door, where it caught the morning light. Folks still talk about the blizzard that took the pastor's daughter, and the silent rider who brought her back. Some say he was a ghost. Others say he was justice itself. But those who know better, they just say he was a man trying to balance a crooked world. One name at a time,